But hey, we're kicking off a series this morning, and it's on the book of Proverbs. And as I was thinking about even just kind of this year, man, I know that for me, I've wanted to do something on Proverbs for a really, really long time. And we're walking through Ephesians, and we're going to get back to Ephesians in February. But I thought, with a new year, I think it's always good to just talk about things that will help us in the year to come. And as I was thinking about like 2025, and even just like a good rule of life, man, is that wisdom. I mean, if you want 2025 to be a year where God's hand is on you, one of the things that would be so worth pursuing is wisdom. And as I was thinking about that, I was like, okay, so I want to do a thing on the Proverbs. Proverbs is kind of a book of wisdom. I'm like, what would be a good title for a series? And so I thought, because I'm so trendy, to pick a book that they stopped making new ones of in 2016. So I'm under the decade mark. So 2016 is when the last time they made one of it. I thought, it would be the idea of like blank for Dummies. And I had no idea just how popular those books are. It's crazy, those books, man. There are over 1,600 different For Dummies books. Just think about that, man. And just a quick Google search will show you that the internet thinks there are a lot of them that are pretty weird. And these are the top three that came on most lists, or I found that they thought were kind of interesting. One is string theory for dummies, which I think is interesting. And the reason why is because that's a concept that you need a PhD to understand. And so I'm thinking if you're the type of person that wants to understand the string theory, I'm guessing a For Dummies book isn't how you're going to figure that one out. You know what I mean? Maybe you've read it and you're totally understanding. If that's you, then that's great. But that's one. Another one that I thought was kind of interesting was Elvis for Dummies. And I think that's interesting because of just the amount of things that are out there about Elvis. Okay. Even in the last year, I watched the Elvis movie, very good. And then there's a documentary on Netflix about Elvis. I don't know if you guys have watched it or not. Conan O'Brien talking about Elvis is very interesting. But there's so many things out there about him, you'd be like, if I want to get to know Elvis better, I think there are better places to go than a For Dummies book. I don't know, that just call me crazy, but that's one of the ones that's out there. And then the one that the internet at least would say is the weirdest of all is baby massages for dummies. I just want you to think about this. There is a book full of different ways that you can massage a baby. And that is the For Dummies book, and that is there. And even though there are some weird ones, the truth is about the For Dummies books is that since they were released, they have sold over 250 million copies. I'm guessing at least 12 of them were about baby massages. But the thing is that here you've got this book. And what I like about the book is I think that the concept works really well as we considered this year as, hey, 2025, we want it to be different. And the reason why is because what the Dummies book is saying is it's saying that in order to achieve mastery over something, you have to acknowledge that at some level you don't understand. Or even this way, to achieve mastery at some level, what you have to acknowledge is that at some place you are a dummy. And I like the way that Proverbs talks about wisdom, because even as Proverbs talks about wisdom, one of the things that you'll discover is that part of having wisdom is realizing that you need wisdom. And so I want to read you, I'm going to jump all over the book of Proverbs, but I want to read Proverbs 12:5 as a way to kind of springboard our talk this morning. And it's Proverbs 12:5. Actually, Proverbs 12:15, sorry. It says this: for the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. That it's saying this, to a fool. A fool is someone who is a know-it-all. A fool is someone whose posture is always such that, got it. And the thing is, what happens is when we don't act like we need advice, we end up getting ourselves into trouble. I was thinking about the situation that when we were in my office, I have a conference table in my office for the meetings that we do in there, and we have the rolly chairs that we put around it. And so I was like, I'm going to help the process of putting this whole thing together, and I'm going to put together the chairs, okay? And if you know anything about me, one of the things that you know is that I am so bad at building things. Like, I was not made to build anything. But I was like, I want to help. Like, I don't want to just delegate this to everybody. Like, I'm going to help build these chairs. And so there were several of them, and so I built the first one. And man, I followed those directions to a T. And if you are bad at building, you know that the only way to be able to do stuff is that you keep coming back to the directions, making sure that everything is careful. You second guess every decision that you make. Like, that's kind of how I started. And then there was a couple chairs, so I needed to build another one. And so I'm like, okay, this will be my second chair that I'm going to put together. And I treated the second chair like I've never seen a chair before. And so I went back to the directions, just followed them to a T. But here's the problem with doing twice flawlessly, is that I got kind of confident. I'm like, there's only so many pieces to a chair. I can put this together. I don't need to use the directions. I've done this twice. I am basically an expert at chair building. And that was a chair that I put together backwards. And I was like, I can't sit in this chair. It's impossible that everything is backwards. And I think if I tried, I think it would fall apart. And it's one of those things. Like, that thing, that book, the booklet to how to build a chair was created for people like me. And it's foolishness to think that just because I got two things right, that I'm going to be able to handle the third. And I think that we all probably have experiences in our lives, right? Where maybe we got a little confident, where we started thinking, you know what, I got this. And we ended up paying for it. And the way we paid for it was far more significant than a chair that was put together backwards that you were able to put together right. And so what I wanted, and what wisdom does, is wisdom comes in and it helps us to avoid those types of situations. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to give a few thoughts on wisdom. And I would just say this from the chute too. Proverbs is a book of wisdom. That honestly, I could spend a year talking about the wisdom in Proverbs. So what I'm going to say this morning is barely going to scratch the surface. It is a sliver of what is there. But maybe you're here and part of your New Year's, new you kind of thing is you're like, I want to read the Bible, but I don't know where to start. That if that is where you are, a great place to start is the book of Proverbs. That one of the things you'll find with Proverbs is you'll find that there is so much wisdom in there. And a lot of it, to be honest with you, regardless of the translation of the Bible that you're using, you're going to find it to be very straightforward, and there's not a lot of room even for interpretation. So you could just kind of read through it. And what you'll discover that what I'm saying is right, that there is a lot of wisdom to discover in there. But still, I want to give you a few thoughts on wisdom this morning as it pertains to not being a dummy. And the first one is this, is that you got to be careful of faux wisdom. That as you think about wisdom, that you want to be careful of faux wisdom, because some things, what they will do is they will present themselves as wisdom, but they're not. Even, and I read that verse 15, where it's like, a fool thinks he needs no advice, but a wise person listens to advice. That as soon as I read that, I started thinking, does that mean that we have to take advice from everyone that wants to give advice? So if you have a public field, I imagine that you've probably experienced a lot of people wanting to give you advice. And is the proverb really saying that anytime someone gives you advice, you should take it? And one of the beautiful things about Proverbs is that oftentimes they come in couplets. So this verse is given as a rule, and then there's a couplet, if you look at the following verse, to kind of help you to see maybe a little bit bigger context around the verses. Let me read you this. I'll read it to you in context. It says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. The vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult. So what you see here is you see a couple ways that faux advice presents itself. That one is that you have the vexation of the fool. That sometimes faux advice will present itself to you in the form of the vexation of the fool. And this is talking about the person who is always mad about something. That this is the person whose emotions influence them far more than the circumstance that they are addressing. That Bruce Watke, in his commentary on Proverbs, that he actually says this. He says that the inner mood of irritation, which would be like vexation, that the inner mood of irritation is a dangerous emotion. And part of what the proverb is saying there in verse 16 is saying, just because someone is passionate, it doesn't mean they're right. That sometimes people will present something very passionately and they'll just assume they're right, but just because they're passionate doesn't mean they're right. And another way that faux wisdom will present itself to us is honestly, it's through an insult. I think you've probably been there, right? Where someone like takes you aside and they want to give you some advice, and really they're more concerned with hurting you than they are making you better. And what the author of Proverbs is saying is he's saying, he's saying a wise person is someone who sees that for what it is. A wise person is able to look at something and be like, well, that's just someone who likes to be angry. Being angry. It's saying that a wise person is saying, well, that they spoke that to me, but the truth is that was more of an insult than it was anything for that, and I see that for what it is. And so for us, I think what we also have to look at is, are we giving faux wisdom out there? Like, are you one of those people who's easily set off, who's easily irritated, who gets set off? And what the proverb would say is, that is something that isn't wise. That is something that is what fools do. And are you the type of person that honestly, in your desire for someone to hear what you have to say, that you will do whatever it takes, even if it means that you have to insult them so they will hear what you say? That here you have the vexation of the fool, you have the insult. And here's what we can see, is we can see that wicked advice can be something that is incredibly dangerous. That faux wisdom left unchecked is something that can be incredibly dangerous. And the author of Proverbs says this in chapter 12, where it says this, it says, the thoughts of the righteous are just, but the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright delivers them. I like the way the CEV version of the Bible translates this. It says that bad advice is a deadly trap, but good advice is like a shield. I think if we were to be honest with ourselves, right? There have probably been moments where someone gave us really bad advice, and because of that advice, we ended up experiencing a trap that was very hard. And what the Proverbs is saying, be leery of faux wisdom, of something that presents itself as wisdom, but the truth is it's more of a trap. The second thought is this, is that wisdom comes from an abundance of wise people. That wisdom comes from an abundance of wise people. That originally I wrote this, I was going to say wise wisdom comes from an abundance of wise people, but then I realized that wasn't very wise, because there's no such thing as wise wisdom. It's just wisdom. So I didn't, but I wanted you to know that I had it in my notes like that for a second. But if you think about what it's saying here, is part of what the Proverbs is saying, it's saying, man, that to be wise is to have wise people in your life. A fool thinks he needs no advice, but a wise person, a wise man, listens to advice. And I think that we have to realize that this is talking about how there are an abundance of people out there who can help us experience the things that God has placed on our hearts. One of the things that people will do sometimes is they get into this trap where they just have to find like one person. You know, and if you grew up in like youth group about the time that I grew up in youth group, that there was this thing that kind of happened and then it was corrected, and I didn't coin this phrase, but it's called like the mentoring myth. And it's this idea that every person should just have like one person who's investing in them, who they see as a mentor. And it's almost seen like, it's almost talked about like a marriage in some ways, where it's like you find your person, you seek them out, you go to coffee with them twice a month, that you bestow the title on them, that they receive the title from you, and then you walk the road of life together the rest of your life. And it's a picture of mentoring, and maybe you have someone who you meet with regularly, but really what Proverbs advocates for is it advocates more for an abundance of counselors than just one. That even if you think of what the whole message of Proverbs, Bruce Watke in his commentary, he mentions that never in the book of Proverbs does it advocate for just one counselor, but it's always advocating for multiple ones. And just a few examples here that you'll see here in chapter 11 and chapter 15, it says this, where there is no guidance, a people falls. But in abundance of counselors, there is safety. In chapter 15, it says, without counsel, plans fail. But with many advisors, they succeed. Now, Proverbs can be kind of dangerous when you treat these verses like a formula. Like 1 + 1 always equals 2. Like that's pretty easy. The Proverbs aren't really meant to be read that way. Like it's not meant to be something where it's like if you always do these things, you are going to get these results. And even if you just look at the wisdom literature like side by side, so if you look at Proverbs with the Psalms, with Job, and with Ecclesiastes, what you'll discover in those books is that there are examples in those books where people literally did the right things. And even though they did the right things, it was still hard for them. I mean, oftentimes in the Psalms, psalmist is going to pray, why, God, is this happening to me? And so sometimes you're going to do the right thing and get the wrong results. But what Proverbs is saying, this is the best way forward. And beyond this being the best way forward, that this is the more likely scenario if you do this than if you do something else. So even if you think about chapter 11, where it talks about there's no guidance if people fall, that it's using like your community being attacked as an example. And so it's this idea like, if you're leading a community and it's being attacked, the worst way forward is to be like, I'm going to John Wayne this thing. I'm going to shoot from the hip and I'm going to go out completely on my own. I got it. But what it's saying is that if you want your people to be safe, if you want to protect your community, well, the best way forward is through an abundance of counselors. It's going to be more likely that you would be successful if you're like, hey, we've got to figure this out together, than you saying, hey, I'm going to take this on my own. And it works the same way with success too, that if you want to be successful, there is wisdom in saying, I've got to get as many people around me as possible to achieve this goal if I'm going to be successful in this endeavor that I want to go. But even though it's more successful than just saying, hey, I'm just going to go for it. Then what the Proverbs is saying is it's saying that there is wisdom in an abundance of counsel. And so then it shows us also kind of what comes from that. So there's an abundance of counsel. If we have an abundance of counsel, what's more likely? Well, what's more likely if you have an abundance of counsel is that you're going to have success and that you're going to be safe. It's not a guarantee, but it's better than just trying to take it on your own. And I think that if you were to just kind of put that all together, that part of what it's saying that to take things on your own is dangerous. Take things on without having any idea of what you're doing, that's a very dangerous way to live. Probably not dangerous in the sense that like you're going to get physically hurt, but I think it can be dangerous for us in all kinds of ways. Take something on and you don't really know anything about it. I mean, that can ruin your reputation. You can look foolish. Take something on and you don't really know anything about it. I mean, if you're talking about business, then sometimes when that happens and you end up risking things that you aren't willing to risk, and then you didn't know anything about what you were doing, and then you lost that thing that you weren't really willing to risk, that can be very, very dangerous. That it can also be just dangerous, like, emotionally. You know, like if you're constantly trying things without doing any research, without going to it, you're probably going to fail a bunch. And eventually that's going to kill your self-confidence. And you're going to be afraid to try anything new. That what the Proverbs is saying is it's saying find people who are wise. Find people who have done the things that you want to do, and then learn from them. That there's wisdom in an abundance of counselors. Even as I think about our church, that this is one of the reasons why I'm so thankful for a board. That I think about our really specifically, I think about our building process. Built that addition last year, and that didn't happen because I was like, I'm unilaterally going to push this thing through. That really the way that happened was we saw an issue. As a group of people, we looked at it, we poked holes at it, and we decided, hey, this is the best path forward. It wasn't just one person, it was everybody around the table that made that decision. And even when I think about like the project and the success of the project, like, man, it was more successful because we had a group of people sitting around a table who were there because God put them there with the ability to speak into it. And I think that that's part of the idea. Is like in your life, if there are an abundance of people who have wisdom that are speaking into your life, it's going to be better than if you don't. For me, what I do is I look at people who are in positions that I like, places I want to be, or they've accomplished things I want to accomplish. And whenever I find those people, I try to take them to coffee or take them to lunch, and I want to learn how they did this thing that is, whatever my goal. And for me, there have been two groups of people that I've really pursued over the last, really probably the last 6 or 7 years, is people who have been at the same, like who lead pastors who've been at the same church for 20 plus years. May I tell you what, like not everybody does. And so whenever I talk to someone and they're like, I'm going on 3 decades, man, I want to hear everything from that person because that's my dream. I sit them down and I'm like, hey, tell me, what was harder than you expected? Hey, what is something that you wish you would have known when you were at like year 7? Hey, what is something that, what were some challenges? Like all that stuff, I want to know it all because that's one of my goals. And for me, the other one is this is when I find people in ministry who have kids that love Jesus, who have crossed into adulthood. And so if I can find someone who has kids who are adults, who like grew up in ministry and they love Jesus, man, I will talk to those people and I will ask them every question because I can tell you this, that what I want the most for Jack and Madeline is that they love Jesus. And I know there are challenges of that sometimes being in the church, and so I'm like, hey, tell me, how did you cross this threshold? And those are just goals to me. So I find people who have it and I'm like, hey, help me get here. And so I think for all of us, here's the question that we have to ask. What are those things in our lives? What are the things in your life where you're like, okay, me plus 10, this is something I'd like to experience? And then, okay, is there anyone in my life who is where I want to be in 5, 10 years? And if there is, then it's like, okay, what can I learn from those people? And this is where I think that the value of the local church is often missed. That, man, if you come in and leave and don't get to know anybody, part of what you're missing out on is you are missing out on a wealth of wisdom that is available to you just by simply getting to know people better. And this is one of the reasons why we like to, especially first of the year, we like to push connect groups, we like to push classes, we like to push serving. We talk about party with the pastor all the time. That the reason why we do all of those things is because part of coming to know Jesus better is coming to know his people better. And coming to know his people better will only enrich your life in ways that oftentimes you don't even expect. Man, this summer, Jack was on a trampoline like right when football started, and he rolled his ankle. First time in his whole life he ever rolled his ankle. And the last thing I wanted to do is take him to urgent care for them to just tell me it was swollen. And so, man, I'm like, who do I know? And man, I brought that boy over to Marsha's house, and she looked at that ankle, and she told me you don't need to take him to urgent care. And I saved $100 that day. But here's I know that I know her and I have an advantage because I know a lot more people. But here's the deal. If you're not getting connected, you're not going to know people. But if you are getting connected, you never know who you can count on to help you to get wisdom in those moments in your life when you need it the most. So wisdom comes from an abundance. Counsel. There's another thought about wisdom is wisdom is leery of self-reliance. Wisdom is leery of self-reliance. That even I think about the Proverbs that I've looked at so far, that it's all kind of going at this same idea. It says that the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. Where there's no guidance, a people falls. Without counsel, plans fail. It's like a fool is right in their own eyes. A fool has a posture that says, I don't need any help. And then you think about those two verses following it, it's the same idea. That if you're not looking for guidance, if you're not looking for counsel, why would you not look for guidance? Why would you not look for counsel? It's because you think you don't need it. And a picture of that is a picture of pride. And I like the way that the Proverbs talks about pride. It says this, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. That word haughty, that it has to do with a rising pair of eyes. That it's meant to convey this image of someone who is always looking down on someone else. And it really checks out with the idea of pride, because it's like, I'm not going to seek guidance from anybody. I don't need it, that I've got this under control. And what the author of Proverbs is saying that if you live in a way that is proud, then what will inevitably come is destruction. And there's all kinds of ways that pride manifests itself. Pride manifests itself with not seeking out advice. It manifests itself, honestly, with an inflated view of if you have an inflated view of your abilities, that's a picture of pride. I have a friend I used to play pickup basketball with. His name was Chris, and he thought he was Kobe Bryant. He was not Kobe Bryant, man. But he shot the ball like he was. And man, he missed every basket, and we lost every game that Chris was on. And the thing is, man, like, that's a picture of pride. And what ended up happening was everybody ended up losing because you had one guy on the team who had an inflated view of themselves. The truth is, when you have an inflated view of yourself and your abilities, eventually you're going to lose. Another way that pride can manifest itself is when you see someone fall. And when you see someone fall, your response to that is, that would never be me. Man, that's pride. The response when you see someone fall should be, God, please don't let that be me. Beyond that, your response should be looking at the safeguards that you have in place to make sure that that isn't you. But to look at someone who falls and to say, that would never be me. What you're saying is you're better than that person. You're saying you're stronger than that person. What you're doing is you have a rising pair of eyes where you're looking down on them saying that you're better. And that comes before destruction. Another example of pride and how it fleshes itself out is the way we deal with things that have bested us in the past. Maybe you've experienced victory over something. And maybe you're going on a long period of time where you've experienced victory over something, that it is pride to think, you know what? I've been doing pretty good for a long time. I'm going to go back close to this thing that almost destroyed me a while ago. That is a picture of pride, that pride comes before destruction, that pride, a haughty spirit, comes before a fall. And it's wise to see that and to be aware of it. Now, here's what I love about the book of Proverbs, okay? So I love this about the book of Proverbs, that don't throw anything at me. Let me finish my thought, and then you can throw everything at me in the lobby. But everything that I have said is true regardless of what you think about God. Like, that's the beauty of the book of Proverbs, is that you can read it and you can be like, man, it's wise. Like for me, before I fell in love with God, I was incredibly intrigued by the book of Proverbs, because you can just read it and you're like, everything in here is true and it makes sense. And honestly, most everything that I have said, except for the times where I mentioned God, you could probably find something that's not religious to make the exact same point that I've made. But as true as that is, here's one of the things that is really worth noting. That though you might be able to have a form of wisdom and keep God on the periphery, that you can't have wisdom truly if you don't know him. And my last point, it brings God into the chat, and it's this. It's the true wisdom starts with knowing God. That true wisdom starts with knowing God. And if you go to the very beginning of the book of Proverbs, that's kind of how it starts. You see this in chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 7, it says this, is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And fools despise wisdom and instruction. And then jumping ahead to Proverbs chapter 3, it says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. But what it's saying is, it's like if you put it all together, it's saying that it is possible to do things the right way, but still to not really have wisdom. You know, and I would maybe illustrate it this way. I've been able to watch quite a bit of football over the last 2 weeks, which is a gift. And I always think it's interesting when you watch football, when you have like a team that's losing by a bunch, and someone on that team makes a play, and they like get up and celebrate that play. You know, it's like, dude, you broke up a pass, that's true. I don't know why you did that seatbelt thing. You're losing by 30, you know? Or, hey, you got the first down. That's right, but you're going to need a lot more of those. You know, it's a kind of just, it's weird. And it's like, okay, so at one level, though, like they're right. It's a good play. But they're still going to lose. And really, isn't that a picture of wisdom without God? You might get some stuff right. You might have moments where you're like, yeah, first down. But if you don't have him, then it's all a loss. Even the book of Proverbs alludes to this. Because like I mentioned earlier, they come in couplets. They tend to, kind of give a full picture of what's going on. And the full picture that comes, honestly, in verse 16 is interesting. It says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. But then it says this in verse 19. It's better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. It's interesting. It shows us that sometimes the proud have spoil. Meaning that the destruction that awaits the proud isn't always in this life. And what bringing God into it does is it gives us hope beyond this life for those moments where maybe we do everything right, but it still doesn't make any sense. And that more than you need wisdom, you need Jesus. Paul says it this way in his letter to the church at Corinth. He says this, and because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption. So as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. That wisdom is available to us. But man, to truly have wisdom is to look to God, the giver of it all. Let's pray. God, we love you. God, we're thankful. We're thankful for the hope that is ours. We're thankful, Jesus, that you show everyone grace in the sense that they can have wisdom and get some things right. And I just pray that we'd be people, God, who are leery of self-reliance. I pray, God, that we would be people who have an abundance of counselors. I pray that we'd be people who can tell the difference between faux wisdom and real wisdom, God. But more important than all of that, I pray that we will be people who've experienced you. True wisdom. Wisdom from above that comes from Jesus Christ. And that you would help us to be a group of people that is willing to bet it all on who he is and what he's done. God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for what you've done. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Love you guys.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for Service Online today.
And if you feel called to give at New Life, there's two different ways you can do so. You can text the number 84321 with the amount that you would like to give, or you can go online to giving.nlspringfield.com.
And we would love to see you here at New Life in person sometime. And when you're here in person, the best way to connect with us is at Party with the Pastor. It is the first Sunday of every month, and it is a party. We've got games, snacks, giveaways, and you'll get to know New Life just a little bit better.
We would love to see you in person. We have services at 8, 9:30, and 11. We would love it if you would join us.